Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. Now, I've got an interesting video topic for you, and that's the current love/hate relationship that the establishment has towards Bitcoin. Now, why is this video important? Well, it's not immediately important for the short term. If you were interested in seeing what's going to happen with the price of Bitcoin, a month from now or even 6 months from now, this is probably not the video for you. But this is a video about the long-term outlook. So we're at the stage now where the impact of retail is becoming increasingly minimal. If we want to see Bitcoin get, a 2x and go to 200,000, a million eventually, we need to see large volume, right? So a lot of the movement that we've seen so far have been from institutions, not retail, but we are slowly going to move into a time where increasingly the amount of capital going in is more so from states. And that is the big deal when it comes to large-scale establishment adoption, because of course we've got the ETFs, and that does have an impact, but when it becomes a point of national policy, this is when the most important movements of Bitcoin comes, and once these things happen, there's really no going back from it. So of course it's been a big deal that, Trump has, become very pro-crypto in general, not just Bitcoin. This is something to really focus on, but I want to talk about, the interesting debate going on within the establishment, and that is whether to allow Bitcoin to continue going forward in the way that it is. But first, guys, my name's DBank Dave. If you like these videos, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to buy cryptocurrency without KYC, you can do so using my referral link in the description down below for localcoinswap.com, and you can use my referral link for HODL. These are two great non-custodial trading platforms, especially HODL. It's extremely safe, and you've also got BitValve, and you've also got BitPapa, where you can buy Monero peer-to-peer. So use my referral link in the description below, and let's get into the video. So it's a really interesting thing, because I think a lot of countries and institutions, the establishment essentially, is coming to grips with the reality of having a unstable fiat Ponzi scheme as a basis for its monetary policy. For those that aren't familiar with the whole Bitcoin narrative, essentially dollars are backed by nothing, right? There was a time where a dollar was simply a receipt to pay the bearer thereof to like a certain amount of gold or silver, right? That's what kept currency in check. You can't just print gold out of thin air. It's a difficult process, and that's what helped provide value to the currency, right? But with currency, what it is now, it's what you call fiat currency. And fiat means the value is determined by the government. So whatever the government or the ruling establishment says it's worth is what it's worth. But this basically provides them an incentive to create as much of this fake money out of thin air as possible. They can just go to the printing press, create notes out of thin air, and as a result, there's no incentive for them to just continue to print money, because then with this money, they can use it to pay off their debts, they can use it to fund infrastructure, and essentially pay for elections when they can promise that, they're going to be the party of education and healthcare and all this. Really, all they're doing is printing money out of thin air and stealing it from the public. It's an unofficial form of taxation, right? So a lot of institutions are more aware of this cycle. I'm sure you get a lot of very naive politicians who say, well, we're just going to, increase public spending, but ultimately where they get that money is from the printing press, right? It's this very immoral way of doing things. And this is why we have Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a fixed supply, and ultimately it's going to get to the point where there's zero inflation. It's all deflation at some stage. And this is why buying Bitcoin is, you could say, it's a hedge against the current monetary system. In fact, you could go as far as to say it's shorting it. So if you are of the belief that government debt is completely out of control, governments are only going to continue spending more money, aka printing more money, it's only going to make sense that you would bet against this system. And that's where I believe that people like Larry Fink and the other large institutions, they are essentially recognizing the game for what it is, and they're essentially shorting the financial system by going into Bitcoin. And that is where a lot of the institutions have come in the past 2 years, as they've come to realize the reality of what Bitcoin is. However, at the same time, the establishment, who is also very much married at the hip to governments and the overall bureaucracy, they also recognize that they're kind of rooting for one team against another, and I'm sure there is going to be a bit of a power struggle within the establishment to ensure that the dollar retains its viability, because essentially the establishment, well, the government, for all intents and purposes, their power base really is based on the fact that they can print money out of thin air and keep this huge behemoth running. They can keep this enormous bureaucracy running, keep people employed, keep the public sector functioning. So they really need this dollar Ponzi scheme to keep going on. But the institutions are like, well, hey, we can't really make much money. I think that the people like in BlackRock and other institutions, they're more loyal to making dollars for their shareholders as opposed to doing the government's bidding. But I have no doubt that the government, certain elements within the government, particularly the Democrat Party, would not like to see this situation unfold. But the Republicans seem a bit more okay with the Bitcoin having an increasingly important place within monetary policy. However, I believe because they are the establishment, at some stage they may recognize, because I think they're all newbies to this stuff, at some stage they may recognize that allowing for the dollar to be continually undermined by alternative currencies like Bitcoin is going to have an impact on themselves, on their own bottom line, and their ability to project power abroad. Because essentially, when the US dollar is the principal currency of the world, they can essentially export inflation by printing dollars and then sending them overseas, ultimately preventing them from, essentially being able to print money out of thin air at the expense of everybody else. And if Bitcoin is increasingly a thing worldwide, well, maybe people decide, you know what, we don't have to buy dollars in order to buy oil. Maybe we can have a deal with Saudi Arabia where we can buy dollars for Bitcoin, or perhaps we can trade with all these sanctioned countries, all these naughty countries that the US doesn't want us to trade with, and we can do so with Bitcoin. So that's a really long introduction to this article, but this is to explain what will inevitably become a schism within the establishment as to whether or not Bitcoin will be adopted. So just as a preface here, just one more preface before I get into it. The CEO of BlackRock, they basically own maybe the second largest amount of Bitcoin in the world, I think, behind MicroStrategy. In terms of institutions, or in terms of ETFs, sorry. So, BlackRock was very instrumental when it came to Bitcoin inflows. A huge amount of, their shareholders, BlackRock shareholders, are benefiting from the price of Bitcoin going up right now. They were buying, I think when it was maybe 50K or something like that. So they're doing quite well. They really are happy about this whole situation, But here's the thing. He's coming out and saying, what to know, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink warned the US could lose its economic edge to Bitcoin if it fails to control its national debt. Now, he isn't making a stand against Bitcoin. It's far from the contrary. He's got a lot of Bitcoin, probably personally, and BlackRock owns a lot of Bitcoin ETFs. So he's not saying, hey, we need to get rid of it. But for you guys in the establishment, if you don't control national debt, Bitcoin's basically going to become a runaway freight train, and it's going to completely overtake what the US dollar has. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic. Who knows to what degree the Bitcoin will, replace the dollar, within the next 10 years. But the point is, the incentives to own more Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin is only going to increase as the national debt continues to go up. And just, again, this is really important to understand. When the national debt is being talked about, just completely scrub that word. There is no debt. What it really is money printing. When there's, a new bridge that's being built for $1 million, for all intents and purposes, it's not coming out of taxpayer money. It's not coming directly from the treasury. It really, at the end of the day, it's coming from printed money, which I guess ends up in the treasury. But people think, oh, that's our hard-earned taxpayers. No, your tax dollars are going to pay the interest on the debt. There's so much debt that your income tax really doesn't mean anything. Really, to pay the debt down requires more money printing and more inflation. And basically, Larry Fink is essentially pointing out that if this situation continues, which it will, because it's inevitable, that's why he owns Bitcoin, he knows about this, he's basically saying to his friends in the government, look, if you continue to treat this, printing press, this monetary policy this very Keynesian economic monetary policy you have with fiat money, with this kind of banking system, don't be surprised if people just start ditching the US dollar. And the reality is, I think he's just stating it rather than giving genuine advice, because I think he knows deep down there's no way to stop the utter collapse of the US dollar at some stage, because it can't be sustained in the way that it is. Next up. While backing decentralized finance and tokenization, Fink stressed the need for better digital identity infrastructure to unlock full institutional adoption. So, I think it's come to the stage where the political aspirations of Bitcoin have splintered into many different directions. So originally, you had a very anarchistic libertarian base being the meta for Bitcoin ideology. Orange pilling is very synonymous with decentralization and getting away from centralized attitudes. That's how it's always been. But with now institutions, I mean, owning almost as much as maybe the Satoshi wallet, with institutions, playing like one of the largest roles in Bitcoin at this stage, I think there is like a push from the likes of large holders like Larry Fink to have more Bitcoin regulation and stuff like that, which, by the way, there's reason for why that might be good, but they're also really big on digital identity, and this is something that I think a lot of libertarian types within Bitcoin aren't totally fond of. I mean, it's already becoming increasingly centralized. All the volume goes to centralized exchanges. And by the way, if you want to buy it using a non-centralized exchange and you want to buy it with fiat, make sure you, again, use my referral link in the description down below for local CoinSwap and HODL. Those are peer-to-peer exchanges that you can use to buy crypto without KYC. Now, a lot of European countries, well, I mean, the EU in general, getting really strict on anonymous purchases when it comes to Bitcoin. I mean, they've even passed this rule where when you send funds from like an exchange like Kraken, you're going to have to prove that the address is owned by you. So if you send it to yourself and you're sending it to cold storage, and say, hey, this cold storage wallet, this Ledger Nano S, this belongs to me, government. So please put me on some database. They're forcing that down Europeans' throats right now. So this is not a good like trend to go towards. But regardless, it is a sign that adoption is basically becoming more like in the picture, and this is probably going to push the price up. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it, to be honest. I have mixed feelings. BlackRock iShares Bitcoin Trust now holds nearly $50 billion in assets, and its tokenized fund BITL is on track to become the largest on the market. Still a fan of digital assets, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink nevertheless said he is not blind to the possible risks to the US from Bitcoin's rise to prominence. I'm just going to skip here. The last thing he says, every stock, every bond, every fund, every asset can be tokenized. If they are, it will revolutionize investing, he wrote. If you're serious about building an efficient and accessible financial system, championing and tokenization alone won't suffice. We must evolve digital verification too. So who really knows? I'm always going to be very hesitant of just large corporations in general. Maybe that's the inner lefty in me. But what I think needs to also be understood as well is that I think there is danger presented by these institutions who are going to try and do more things that will essentially de-anonymize the nature of crypto and increasingly centralize it. But at the same time, if you are looking for an overall gauge of whether the price is going to go up and down based on this narrative that I'm telling you about, overall, the fact is that I think that we've already won major allies. Whether you like them or not, people like Larry Fink and a bunch of other big hedge funds and stuff like that. When you're on their side, it basically means when they also are orange pilled, realistic about the nature of the money system, and they're orange pilled on Bitcoin. These are eventually going to be the biggest voices advocating for Bitcoin as they want to further and further decouple themselves away from this fiat Ponzi scheme, even just for the sake of their shareholders. I think they care more about their shareholders' value. So it's only going to make sense they're going to keep buying Bitcoin, and it's only going to make sense they're going to continue lobbying the government for more Bitcoin. For more, for a better thing going on with Bitcoin. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Again, use my referral link in the description down below, and I'll see you in the next video.